Introduction to Coping Techniques. Listen for the moral of the story. I walk down the road. There is a hole in the road. I do not see the hole. I fall in the hole. It is very deep. At the bottom where I lay broken, it is dark and cold. I can't get out. I walk down the road. There is a hole in the road. I see the holes. I'm walking down the road. I fall in. I can't get out. I walk down the road. There is a hole in the road. I see the hole as I'm walking down the road. I fall in the hole. I want to get out. I walk down the road. There is a hole in the road. I see the hole as I'm walking down the road. I dread falling down the hole. I fall down the hole. I look up and decide to get out. I walk down the road. There is a hole in the road. I see the hole as I walk down the road. I think, oh no, I'm not falling for that again. I fall down the hole. I start climbing out. I walk down the road. There is a hole in the road. I see the hole as I walk down the road. I try not to, but I fall in the hole again. I get out. I walk down the road. There is a hole in the road. I see the hole as I walk down the road. My foot slips and I fall in the hole again, but I do not hit the bottom. I cling to the side and get out. I walk down the road. There is a hole in the road. I step over the hole. I walk down a different road. I mentioned in a previous lecture about all of us having bumps in the road of life, and some of those bumps being self-induced bumps. What self-induced stressors do you have that you could possibly eliminate? That the birds fly overhead, this you cannot prevent. That they build a nest in your hair, this you can prevent. You can't help that there's always going to be birds flying above your head or potential stressors in your day-to-day life. You don't have control over that, but you can do something to deal with those stressors. How do you handle stress? I hope not this way. Here we have an anti-stress kit. The instructions say place on firm surface, follow instructions in circle, and repeat until you are unstressed or become unconscious. Some handle stress by ignoring it, some dwell on it, some deny it exists, some run away from it, some seem to enjoy or thrive on it, some overreact to it. Some handle certain stressors very well, but other types of stressors not so well. You should now have a strong understanding of stress. Now let's talk about specific things you can do to better manage your stress. But before we talk about specific coping techniques, let's address a couple of things that will help you better understand coping techniques in general. First, the coping techniques about which you'll be learning are not rocket science. I have to warn you, if you're looking for super complex techniques that will magically make all of your stress disappear, I'm sorry to tell you that you're going to be disappointed. Coping techniques are quick and easy techniques that help you effectively cope or deal with a variety of stressors, meaning they're meant to decrease or possibly even eliminate your stressors. Doing things that will decrease or eliminate your stressors is often not very complicated, but the results can be profound. Next, let's quickly revisit the model of stress. The primary purpose of coping techniques is to intercept the stress response at the first three levels: stressors, thoughts, and emotions. The higher up on the model of stress you can set up a roadblock, the better. In other words, don't wait until you're about to lose it to deal with stress. Obviously, it's better if you can set up a roadblock at the very first level, the stressor. Do something to decrease or even eliminate the stressor by nipping it in the bud. I know this isn't rocket science, but if you're always late in the morning to class or work, set your alarm clock 10 minutes earlier. Boom, you just blocked or intercepted the stress response. Just by taking care of the stressor, setting the alarm clock 10 minutes earlier to prevent yourself from being late, you stopped your body from going through unnecessary stress-induced physiological reactions. So what? You just blocked the stress response and you weren't late? What's the big deal? Imagine how many times in your life that you would have unnecessarily gone through the stress response from running late or whatever it is if you didn't start setting the alarm clock 10 minutes earlier. You now know what stress does to your body and how important it is to block the stress response. By eliminating the stressor, or at least decreasing it whenever you can, you prevent your body from going through the stress response. If you don't do this throughout your life and you're frequently stressed because you're always running late, it really adds up in terms of the wear and tear on your body. Just as there are cumulative negative effects of stress over time, there are cumulative positive effects from not stressing over time. General requirements. The next item of discussion is some general requirements to any stress management efforts. They're fairly general or broad and may overlap to some extent, but nevertheless, they're critical to effectively managing stress. Being able to effectively manage stress requires awareness. Stress? What stress? I know this is a no-brainer, but I can't emphasize enough the importance of being aware of your triggers, or those stressors that push your buttons. A friend of mine was constantly getting into arguments with anyone and everyone. The cashier at the grocery store, the people sitting behind her at a baseball game, her professors, her boyfriend, her parents, her friends, etc. Just about every week she would complain about someone who had offended her in some way. After she started losing friends, she finally realized that she was tired of always being angry and that she was angered too easily and too often to be able to enjoy life. She vowed to get into the habit of asking herself whenever she felt anger coming on, if the situation really warranted her anger, and if it was really worth it to get mad. To this day, she is a completely different person, a much happier person. She wouldn't have changed, however, had she not become aware that she had an anger problem. He had chest pains, a real wake-up call to slow down a bit. Unfortunately, he was on another line and missed it. Take a step back and become aware of what is causing you stress. Are you in the habit of waiting until the last minute to complete a major assignment? Are you always stressed out because you're running late? Awareness of stress-inducing behaviors is absolutely critical and the very first step to any stress management efforts. Knowledge. The lectures that you've listened to up to this point were part of the understanding stress portion. Gaining a strong foundational understanding of stress was important because you needed to understand elements of stress, such as its types, the role that your personality plays, etc. Action. Real understanding only comes by doing, and only action has the power to turn knowledge into wisdom. Perhaps the most important requirement for successful stress management is doing something about your stressors. Although gaining a strong understanding of stress is a critical precursor to managing stress, what you learn in this class is not meant to stay inside your head, so to speak. In fact, if you don't take some regular and consistent action and make some type of changes to some extent, the information about which you'll be learning will be completely useless. Because no one is perfect in dealing with stress, or at least very few people are, you'll most likely find that it's necessary for you to make some changes in the way you think and behave, which is no small task. Permanent behavior modification can be extremely difficult when attempting to change deep embedded thoughts and habits that have developed over several years. Permanently changing the way you think, perceive, and behave requires mindful, systematic efforts. Mental skills. Managing stress requires mental skills. Practicing mental skills is just as important as practicing physical skills. Practicing physical skills is absolutely essential for improving them. Practicing mental skills is just as critical for improving them as well. A POW who was a concert pianist was in captivity for 7 years and never touched a piano in that time, but he practiced the piano in his mind every day during those 7 years. When he was released and played the piano for the first time since being held captive, he played the piano just as well, if not better, than he did before being captured. Consistency. Even adopting one tiny little seemingly insignificant technique on a regular and consistent basis can make dramatic improvements in your life. Consistency is key. Kobe Bryant definitely would not be one of the best basketball players ever if he showed up only to the games and never practiced. People can exercise once or twice, but if they never do it again, they're not going to experience the long-term benefits of exercise. Sure, they may experience a couple one-time minor benefits just from one bout of exercise, but the major benefits come from exercising on a regular and consistent basis. The same concept applies to stress management skills. You must learn to make them a habit. Habits are powerful and can be a major positive or negative influence. Breaking habits that cause you unnecessary stress and adopting new habits that decrease or even eliminate stress can drastically improve your life. The next item of discussion is the importance of considering the fact that some coping techniques might work really well for you. Some might be okay, and some might not work at all. Here we have a dog teaching other dogs about stress management. The techniques proposed are appropriate for dogs specifically. It's important to choose what works for you. Everyone is different, and what works for one person might not work for another. In order to find which techniques work well for you, it's important to try as many techniques as possible, but it's also important to try them more than once. You might try a technique that doesn't seem to work so well the first time, but you may have not been in the right frame of mind at the time you tried it. It worked much better the second or third time. Here's another illustration of finding what works best for you. I'm not saying that you need to dress up as a clown, but find whatever works for you. Another concept to consider is the the importance of not ignoring stress. It's critical that you make a conscious effort to do something about your stress. I believe that this life is about learning and growing and developing and progressing. There are those who go their entire lives without ever learning how to effectively cope with stress. In order to learn, grow, develop, and progress in terms of how you handle stress, it's absolutely essential that you obviously don't ignore it. Dan Millman, author of No Ordinary Moments, said he received an important lesson about the consequences of ignoring life's warning signs. He says, after hiking up the narrowest trail at Yosemite National Park to the top of Vernal Falls, I met a park ranger who told me about a woman who climbed out over a low railing near the stream just above the falls. She sat down on the shore's edge, removed her hiking boots, and put her feet in the calm, shallow waters. 20 yards downstream, those calm waters poured over the edge hundreds of feet down to a thundering torrent below. Then the ranger was about 100 yards away, walking toward her. He broke into a run as the woman stood and started wading around in knee-deep water. Suddenly, he saw her slip and fall to a sitting position. A moment later, pulled by the strong current, she began slipping over slippery rocks towards the precipice. He yelled, but it was too late. He said he'd never forget the look in her eyes. Not panic, just innocent surprise as she disappeared over the falls. He told me he just stood there joined by a few other people who had seen what happened, stunned by what just happened. It would have been easy to deny anything had happened, but the woman's hiking boots sat alone next to the stream. He pointed, and I turned to see a prominent sign that read, "Danger, strong currents, do not wade or swim." Beneath the calm surface was a powerful undertow sucking everything toward the fall. The poor woman had either missed the sign or ignored it. So what warning signs or stressors in your life do you ignore until it becomes a bigger problem than it needed to be if you paid attention and took care of it earlier? And the last concept or item of discussion is the influence that your parents have on you in terms of how you handle stress. Many adults cope with stress the way they saw their parents cope with stress as they were growing up. And remember, stress is a broad term and encompasses any negative emotion that brings you out of homeostasis. It's common to see the same coping methods in an adult as his or her parents. This can be a good thing if your parents incorporated effective stress management techniques. However, the manner in which our parents cope with stress may not have been effective, and a cycle of ineffective coping skills continues. The first coping technique that we'll discuss is called creative problem solving. In a nutshell, it basically requires that you simply do a stressor inventory or take a look at your stressors and then brainstorm what you can do to combat those stressors. Some stressors are easily nipped in the bud, like setting an alarm clock earlier than normal. However, other stressors are more complicated and might require some brainstorming. Being creative when attempting to solve personal problems or stressors is sometimes necessary. The following excerpts are taken from a newspaper called the New STRAITS Times and illustrate the importance of creative thinking. It's amazing how quickly we pass judgment before we even give a person a fair hearing. Ideas are immediately dismissed as unworkable. In the process, enthusiasm and creativity are stifled. A filmmaker remarked in 1920, "When a century has passed, all thoughts of our so-called speaking movies will be abandoned, and it will never be possible to synchronize with the picture." Similarly, the horseless carriage was predicted to be a luxury for the wealthy only. Unfortunately, most people don't habitually think creatively because the emphasis in our society has always been on logical thinking. A man had lent a friend $5,000 and was worried that he would not get his money back, as his friend was in the habit of conveniently forgetting what he owed others. Therefore, the man needed something in writing in case his worst fears came true. An obvious solution was to ask his friend for an IOU note. However, the friend might get offended and not cooperate. He thought about his problem and came up with several possible solutions, the most creative of which was to email his friend claiming a debt of $10,000, which he immediately received a reply back protesting the sum owed was only $5,000. It was a quick and effective solution. By replying and correcting the error, the man was able to get something in writing. Again, none of these techniques are rocket science, but take a look at some steps to problem solving suggested here. What is distressing you? What are you willing to do about it? How are you handling it now? What are you going to do about it? How have you put your plan into action? And what results can you see? In the lecture introduction to stress, I mentioned that some bumps in the road of life are self-induced. Albert Einstein defined insanity as doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Would you agree that some of your self-induced bumps are from doing something over and over again? Something that causes you unnecessary stress, like waiting to the last minute to complete a major assignment, or getting involved in unhealthy relationships, or whatever it is. So take a look again at those steps to problem solving and take those questions seriously. Take time to respond to those questions and ask yourself if you're doing anything that's causing those self-induced bumps. The supplemental video for this lecture is Managing Stress, Brain Smart, and is just over 2 minutes. It's a British video that kind of recaps what you already know, the stress response, and then they briefly touch on several stress management strategies about what you'll be learning: deep breathing, exercise, creative problem solving, and pet therapy. Key points: the coping techniques are not rocket science, but many of the easiest techniques often produce the most profound benefits. The coping techniques are important because they are geared to intercept the stress response at the first 3 levels. The higher up on the model of stress that you can do something, the better. Some general recommendations for effective stress management are awareness, knowledge, action, mental skills, and consistency. Some techniques might work really well for some of you and not so well for others. Because everyone is so different, it's important to try as many techniques as possible. Don't ignore stress. There are often similarities between how we handle stress and how our parents handled stress. Creative problem solving is a super simple but effective coping technique that involves such steps as identifying your stressors, what you're willing to do about them, how you're handling them now, what your plan is to deal with them, etc. And that's it for this lecture.